Today's episode is a first of its kind. We recorded live from the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville, Tennessee at the Sustainable Packaging Coalition Impact event. It truly was an honor to share the stage with my friend, the amazing Olga Kachook, where she presented the 2026 third annual Sustainable Packaging Trends Report. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any episodes. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, 3M and SpecRite and Forest. We couldn't do the show without them. Welcome to the Sustainable Packaging Podcast with Cory Connors, presented by Atlantic Packaging. I'm your host, Cory Connors. If any of you have heard that, raise your hand, and I thank you for subscribing to my podcast. Today, we're going to do a podcast of this presentation. Is the star of the show, and we will be presenting the Trends Report for 2026 or 2025 to 2026. And this is the third annual. Olga is the director of the SPC and one of the most impressive people in this industry. If you haven't talked to her, pull her aside and say thank you for the work that you do. But we're going to start by her presenting, and then I'll sit her down and we'll ask some questions, kind of diving deeper into each trend. So, Olga, to you.
Well, first of all, Cory, thanks for joining me on stage for this. The Trends Report, like Cory mentioned, this is our third annual, and it's a really fun time for us. It's a fun project that I get to work on. And I think of it as kind of like our breach moment for the packaging industry. So if you remember Planet Earth episodes, you'll know that breaching is when whales jump up out of the water. And dolphins do this as well. You know, they'll follow boats sometimes. And it's interesting. Why does a 200 mammal heave itself out of the water? So fun fact, scientists don't actually know, which I love. I love that there's still some mystery about this. But in the case of dolphins, they're jumping up out of the water to stay in touch, to go faster, to gather food, to socialize. Those all sound like very dolphin things, right?
Sounds right.
In the case of whales, it's to communicate, to claim territory. This is a fun one, to remove parasites from their bodies, and for social interaction. And since we don't actually know definitively why they're jumping up out of the water, I'd like to offer my own theory, which is that maybe they're jumping up out of the water to see, what is this thing called ocean that we've been swimming in? Like, what the heck is this? What is this water? Where are we? And that's why I think it's kind of our breach moment. It's the Trends Report, and taking a step back is our opportunity to leap up out of the water, get away from our desks, get some perspective, think about the world around us, maybe shake off some parasites, have a little bit of fun. Here we go. That's what we're going to do. As Cory mentioned, we've been doing this for 3 years now. We have a couple of different areas that we align the trends to. So we're just going to get right into it. I'll share some of the rationale for our trends, and then we'll talk about it. So in packaging design, what we're seeing is regions defining recyclability. So maybe you caught this at the end of, actually it was the middle of last year, 5 Canadian PROs came together to define recyclability guidelines across all of Canada and eco-modulation, eco-design guidelines. We're starting to see similar, actually the UK is ahead of them in the sense that they have something called the RAM, Recyclability Assessment Methodology. It outlines color-coded assessments of recyclability by material class. And then, of course, the EU with PPWR, similar story, not yet available, but they're working on design for recycling criteria due by 2028. So just 2 years away. And this begs the natural question, is the US next? We have 7 states, 1 PRO. Hopefully there's an opportunity at one point to harmonize and have one accepted material list, one standard list of what we consider recyclable. So we're working towards that. And the even bigger opportunity there is once we have some standardization in regions, we can work that gives companies a lot of opportunity to start designing for lowest common denominators, the similarities across regions. So that's packaging design. Over on the innovation side, we are finally starting to see some really cool innovations and breakthroughs for healthcare and OTC packaging. And this is an area that historically hasn't had a lot of innovation, and for good reason. There's requirements from the FDA. You have to do child seal, tamper evident seals, child safety, drug facts, so all sorts of additional requirements on this category, but they're starting to break through. And it really matters because we'll hear tomorrow on the main stage, Systemic put out a report and they're going to talk about it, just how much plastic waste is going to landfills from the healthcare sector alone. And prescription pill bottles are, a massive, completely untapped opportunity that no one has touched. And finally, we're starting to see the image you have here, innovations like paper prescription bottles. So that's huge. And I think we're going to see more of that. Over in policy, what to say except that EPR had a birthday this year. EPR turned 5. And while it might not feel like we're making big progress, I think it's worth remembering that, 5 years ago, EPR was, we heard some of the discussion earlier. It was theoretical. It was a kind of what if, we didn't really think it might pass. And we've gone a long way in 5 years. Now we're at the point where we can confidently list the things that are challenges. And we heard that on the stage. We have a sort of list of the known unknowns, to quote Donald Trump, which I didn't think I would ever do. But, we know that, for example, there's a lack of harmonization. We know that the enforcement mechanisms haven't necessarily been laid out. And that might not feel like a win, but really it's a huge amount of progress to have made in 5 years. So we're seeing EPR maturing in what hopefully feels like a productive way. And then last but not least, shared data on the recovery side, shared data helping to create recyclability clarity. So EPR programs are, of course, laser focused on recycling rates. And as a result, brands and converters and industry groups are coming together to say, what do we know about true on-the-ground recycling rates for specific categories, moving kind of out of the theoretical, out of the philosophical of, technically it can be recyclable. And the big sort of success story for this that we saw in the past year is what we call the cup grade at Green Blue, the upgrade of polypropylene cold cups to widely recycled under the How to Recycle program. And how did that happen? It happened because of Waste Management making key upgrades at their facilities, but also groups like TRP, How to Recycle, the Next Gen Consortium, key industry players coming together to share data and share what they know about the true on-the-ground recyclability of cups. And I think there's a real sort of pathway here that we can copy and leverage for some other formats. So I hope that this is certainly a trend that everyone here thinks about how they can kind of participate in and contribute to, because it really is a group effort to prove recyclability. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit. So I went quite quickly. We have the trends report launching today. As I mentioned, the 4 trends: regions defining recyclability, innovation in OTC and healthcare packaging, EPR maturing, turning 5, and then this shared data in the recovery space. So you can scan the QR code to download the report. Yeah, Cory, just excited to talk more about them with you.
Hey, friends. We are going to take a quick break to thank our sponsors. Please be sure to support them. Are you shipping with recycled corrugated? Think outside the box with 3M tape. 3M packaging tape can help you overcome your recycled corrugated challenges with confidence, making sure your boxes are sealed securely the first time, reducing downtime, and providing consistent performance. With 3M as your partner, you can maintain productivity, achieve cost savings, and turn packaging problems into sealing success. When you use recycled corrugated shipping boxes, think 3M packaging tape. Sustainability starts long before a product hits a shelf. It starts with the spec. That's why brands choose SpecRite, the leader in intelligent specification data management and modern product lifecycle management. SpecRite turns siloed packaging and product data into connected, reliable intelligence so AI can identify waste, optimize materials, streamline supplier collaboration, and accelerate sustainable product design. If you're trying to reduce packaging complexity or meet evolving regulations, it's time for a spec-first approach. SpecRite, the intelligent foundation for every product. Discover more at specrite.com.
In packaging, it's still, I know a guy. But what happens when you don't? Or when you need something beyond your network? Forest is built for that. A platform that connects packaging knowledge with AI intelligence, giving you access to verified suppliers, real capabilities, and actionable data in one place. Take action at speed. Execute with intelligence. That's Forest. We should have a birthday party, I think. This is a big deal. And I know there's a lot of complaints about there's a lack of consistency or connection between these reports and the EPR laws, but I think we'll get there. But I think a lot of these people work for global companies, and we're not at national or even regional harmonization for recyclability guidelines. So a lot of people come to us with these questions. What kind of a strategy would you recommend they use today before we start to harmonize?
I would say leaning into the common denominators and the themes that we can very clearly pick up on from the different regions and the EPR programs. The signals. I saw an article recently talking about the market signals that EPR fees are telling you. So there's some really, you know, clear kind of themes, simple formats, simple materials over complex materials. There's kind of that natural trade-off. Monomaterials as opposed to a lot of complexity, reduction of the number of components and the number of elements, certain materials or formats like bottles tending to fare better when it comes to recyclability, size as a factor. So small items, typically below 2 inches being an issue really across regions. Like we knew all of these things were recyclability challenges, and now we just have kind of the EPR fees to prove it, if you will, that that's what we need to redesign. And I loved Jeff's point earlier about the opportunity that he sees, the untapped potential for companies to redesign. I know everyone is laser focused right now on reporting and data, but really the big next opportunity is going to be redesigning so that potentially you're reporting on fewer SKUs or, paying lower fees.
It's a simple concept, but it's a very grand mindset that
Right.
I think we need to look at today. Monomaterials, recyclability. If your parents would know what to do with it, it's probably easier to handle. It's probably recyclable. I think that's something to think about because we're dealing with multiple generations in this, United States that need to know how to handle these products after they've used them. And so I think about that a lot from the consumer's perspective. But what products do you think have kind of more potential for over the counter and healthcare packaging? You mentioned paper bottles. This is an incredible innovation, just very recent. And I've been laughed at by this comment before, but I'd love to see reusable packaging in healthcare packaging. Is that possible?
Yeah, so that systemic report that I mentioned, they talk about all sorts of solutions for healthcare. And I don't think it's funny. I would love to use, instead of those paper gowns in hospitals, man, those suck.
Yeah.
If they could just get some reusable textiles in the healthcare setting, I
Right.
think that would go a long way to sort of, elevating the hospital experience. And so things like that, that's one of the solutions that they highlight in the report that, there's some real cost savings there actually when you scale that solution across a hospital system and think about, because well, anyway, it's complex. I don't want to underestimate the unique challenges that the healthcare setting has, because things like biohazards and sharps and all of that, but they've outlined, the systemic report really is fantastic for outlining some of those key opportunities. And then you mentioned OTC. Talk about a standard format. The the Tylenol bottle,
Yeah.
everyone has one, and it is literally the exact same bottle. There's no differentiation of the Tylenol bottle. So what are the opportunities? I think refill naturally comes to mind, and it's already being done by a company that we mentioned in the report called Cabinet Health. So they offer some really nice, sleek, kind of durable containers, and then refill pouches sold already at Target and Amazon with, your allergy meds, your Tylenol, et cetera. You just pour it back into the bottle because, yeah, the stuff you're going through it quite quickly, and the formats are pretty standardized as is. So there's opportunities there.
Well, and those pill bottles are so indestructible. We've reused those for years. Who hasn't put something other than pills into one of those to save it for later, to use it again, batteries or something like that to make sure it's waterproof or drop resistant, whatever the case may be. But there's a lot of people in here. Any engineers or packaging designers in the room? So these are the people we need to help with the future of packaging. Any advice for them on how they can kind of design for EPR and kind of be ahead of that game? Because I know their companies are going to say, "What'd you learn at this conference?"
Well, we talk about it a little bit in the report, and we'll talk about it tomorrow on the main stage. But one thing that I think can sound a little hopelessly naive, but at the same time, it's at least an interesting thought experiment, which is the idea that, okay, there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to EPR implementation and, some of the enforcement mechanisms and exactly what is required, what's de minimis, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down. And the thought experiment I'd like to offer is this. What if you set your own certainty? What if you decided this, we're going to take sort of an approach that assumes that, yes, even the smallest, most annoying components that we are kind of hoping might not have to be reported on, what if we determined and set for ourselves the certainty that I think they are included?
Yeah.
I think we do need to source reduce them. So there's ways to, and in some cases, you're maybe making it more difficult for yourself. But at the same time, if California comes around and says, hey, guess what? That thing that you thought wasn't included is actually included, you're going to be ahead of the game because you thought it through and you sort of elevated the requirements for yourself just in case. And in that setting, you actually came out ahead. So there's this idea that I've been playing with. I didn't come up with it. I heard it from a brand over on the European side
We'll give you the credit.
when I was at the Sustainable Packaging Summit. And I feel like, the Europeans are usually onto something. And she was talking about this idea of setting your own certainty in the face of uncertainty, kind of calling it and moving forward. And I think it goes a little bit to what Paul was saying about, taking some action instead of sitting in the unknown and not being able to move forward, not setting a strategy, really be thinking through how how can I set some certainty for myself? And then the other thought experiment that I just kind of recently came up with that I think could be an interesting one again for folks to try on is how would you design your packaging portfolio if you started fresh today? If you didn't have all the baggage of how it was designed 5 years ago or 10 years ago, if you were kind of playing God with your packaging portfolio, knowing what you know about EPR fees and about PCR mandates and about all of the requirements that have come at you recently with on-pack labeling and, proving recycling rates, how would you design your portfolio? And is there an opportunity? In some case, that's a fictional portfolio. It doesn't exist. But is there a way to move a little bit closer to that and have that feeling of starting fresh, given what we know now, as opposed to kind of retroactively trying to pull your portfolio in with the times? You know what I mean?
It's the magic wand concept. Yeah. If I could start over, I love that idea. And I think that's a great, concept for a packaging team to get together and say, for an hour a week, get together and say, what if we could do that? How could we totally reinvent this thing? And I think that could potentially have a huge impact at a lot of places because I know some companies who have done that and they've had a lot of success.
Yeah, and I would say, engineers, maybe they're feeling like that's not our strong suit. Bring in the creatives, and have it be a team effort where, at the very least, it's a really interesting exercise that I think will lead to some innovation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you mentioned the cup grade of the polypropylene cups. I know Michelle Carvel always talks about data. Data is the key to success here. And because we found that there was enough of these cups getting recycled, you were able to upgrade them to a better recyclability rating. Are there any other materials or packaging items that could benefit from that kind of data?
So many, all of them, all of them need better data. But the two that we're laser focused on at the SPC right now as a result of 343, hopefully you've been on a collaborative call or have seen an email about this, is coated paper and molded fiber. So if you work in that space, if you have packaging that you have done flow testing on, that you've talked to MRFs about, that you have data on how it's performing in MRFs, please come to us and at least have a conversation about what you've learned in this process. Hopefully you can share some of the data because we are, speaking of cup grades, there's also downgrades.
Right.
Which is when certain formats that we once thought or kind of all assumed were recyclable, now we have to go back and do a little bit of showing our homework, to prove that yes, in fact, it is getting sorted, it is getting collected. There are end markets. So we've taken this on as part of the SPC's Paper Recyclability Collaborative. My coworker, Brad, has been leading that work. And if you haven't talked to him about it, if you didn't know that we were working on that, this is my kind of main plug in order to then eventually feed the data over onto the How to Recycle side, share it with Cal Recycle, and hopefully see an upgrade, back into widely recyclable for a couple of those other categories. So yeah, I think fiber often gets a bit of a, in the sense that we just assume, of course,
Right.
we'll be able to
Right.
process it. And so now we're at that point where we have to backtrack and show some of our work, show some of the data.
And I think with the onset of AI sorting technology, we're going to have a lot more data, which will help us all. Or it could kind of thought check some of us, like, hey, maybe that material isn't the best. Maybe we could change to this, or maybe it needs to be 3 inches wide instead of 2.5, or whatever the case may be. I'm excited personally about some of that because I've had my own thoughts, and I know we all kind of think that what we're doing is really helpful and very beneficial, but it will be nice to know for sure. I'm excited to see. Thinking ahead, this is the third annual. For the fourth annual, do you have any big predictions for trends coming up? Is AI going to take over and put us all out of work?
I don't think so. I think what we'll see is progress on a couple of fronts. I think if I had to guess, we'll start to, as Jeff was saying, start to see some of the payoff of expanded infrastructure in EPR states. Particularly Oregon, we might have some cool numbers or data,
Yep.
and just more of a sense of how do we channel funds into infrastructure to then quickly be able to accept more, because right now it's a total chicken and egg of it.
Right.
There aren't the recycling rates to get it to have the widely recycled label, and that's because there's no infrastructure. So we have to break that loop, but I think we'll get there. And EPR funds are critical for the infrastructure and for the collection programs. I'm hoping that next year we can come up here and tell you about consumer education work that you've helped us fund. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the main stage tomorrow, but there's so much work that needs to go into helping consumers understand, for example, how to read the how to recycle label and what to do with it, and also the importance of recycling or composting. And there's plenty of education that we need to do on the refill side as well. So I'm hoping that we'll have some cool case studies or success stories on the consumer education front. This one is going to sound really specific, but I think I could call it now. I think we're going to have a couple of additional case studies on reusable e-commerce. So if anyone followed some of the news around FedEx partnering with Returnity, reusable shipping for B2B purchases and shipments, I think there's going to be more of that to come, because that secondary packaging is, I don't want to call it low hanging fruit because it's not necessarily easy, but it is ripe for the conversion to reuse. And there's a lot of work that's been done to fine tune the offerings and get it to cost parity with single use cardboard. So between and what we've seen for a number of years is the paperization trend continuing. We saw that actually in the healthcare and OTC space, right, with that paper bottle. So
Incredible.
who knows? Paper might be coming for another category that we just assumed there would never be a paper solution for, and we might be able to kind of report back on that.
We saw paper wine bottles in Frugal Pack has a booth. That's something I never thought I would see in this industry, and it's incredible. It's working. So thank you all for listening. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast, Sustainable Packaging Podcast. Olga, a round of applause for Olga, please. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cory.